I argued last week, or at least made the case last week, and still make the case that in order for us to understand the Book of Esther, we really have to have a backdrop of Genesis. People, when they talk about the Tower of Babel, right, they say, does that mean that they ended up babbling? Well, that's part of it. But we miss the deeper meaning of the text. The Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 is a backdrop of Babylon. It's the seed form of Babylon. And what's going on in Babel is this mindset that we can be so majestic, so mighty, build such a city on this earth that the greatest God of heaven would want to come down this tower and be our God. Now, it's important to understand they're not doing this because they want to honor God, right? Maybe we would want to build something for God because we want to honor God. We want him to have the pedestal. No, they're building this tower because they want to capture the attention of God in such a way that God becomes their little dog and pony show. They put God on a leash, a nation bothers them, and they say, go get that nation, right? So they're really trying to be God, manipulating God. And when you understand this backdrop for Esther, you can see the same backdrop and setting for Luke, right? You have with Luke the setting of this king who has orchestrated this empire in such a way that there's world peace. He makes a decree, everyone responds and gives us or responds to this census. And it's the same thing here. Xerxes, Ahasuerus, right? King of Kings is his Persian name. When you look at it in the Hebrew, Ahasuerus, it really means that he's head. So in his mindset, he's head over all. King of Kings, Lord of Lords, he's the one who has established this kingdom. Mordecai has been captured by Babylon, but this king has captured Babylon, right? So you can hear the ego, the mindset of how he rules over all things. And so it's important to have the setting of the story set in those terms. This is the king who determines world history, and the God of heaven does what this king wants. So that's the important premise, the important claim as we look at the book of Esther, because that's the tension. Has God abandoned his people? Is God active when he's silent? Is God present when his name is never mentioned? And so when we look at it in this context, we may say, well, is this King of Kings truly going to claim domination? And I'd say if this book did not belong in our canon, it would have ended in verse 18, and it would be the resolution. Here's the King of Kings who has found his queen, and he's on top of the world. But clearly we see the story goes on, and there's subtleties in these verses where we see cracks in this kingdom, and important cracks, that this king is not as situated and strong as he thinks. And so the issue then, as a woman has shut him down, will this king claim domination over women once again? Will he be truly the King of Kings or the true head of all? So there's a scheme where we have the advisors, we have the characters, and then we have the contest and the outcome of the very contest. And so let's begin with the scheme. So the king, his anger settled down, and this is kind of funny. That now once again he's realizing that he kind of really did love that queen, right? So Ahasuerus, my head of all, really is a headache. He's a headache for Vashti. He's a headache for the advisors. He's a headache for other world rulers. And he's a headache for God. I mean, that's sort of the pun here, that the Lord looks down and wants to see what the headache is doing and how the Lord is going to deal with him. But this king's anger settles down. Now, in terms of what he wants with my head and what he's going to do, that he wants to take Vashti back. Now, this is something that would be very detrimental for the empire. They made a decree And remember what I said. You take the small problem, you make it a really big one. They have set up themselves in a very big problem. Because they made this royal decree for every man, every language. It's oral and written. So it means people who can't read have heard the decree. People who can read have the decree in writing. So everyone in the empire knows what the king has decreed. And if he has decreed that the man's going to rule the house, and the women need to understand that, this would mean that if he takes Vashti back, it goes back to what his advisors were concerned about. This would say that, A, women could rise up and say no to men, and that could be just complete chaos, right? I mean, who wants that is what they're saying. But what is more, there's a deeper issue, because now if he takes her back, it means that the royal decrees mean nothing. And if he does that, it means his word is void, right? This is one of the things we say about Scripture. God is an authoritative God because the words he says, the promises he makes come to fruition. We see them. Right? We see the manifestations of the prophets being fulfilled. So this man, if he takes his queen back because he misses her and he's having a tender moment and for whatever reason he desires her again, this is going to look really bad. So the royal advisors get together and they say, my goodness, you can understand they're getting together in their own little huddle and say, if this guy takes the queen back, we're going to look like idiots in front of Greece. They're not going to respect us. Nobody in the empire is going to respect us. We're going to have a diplomatic nightmare. We're going to have an international nightmare because Greece is going to just laugh at us, which they kind of end up doing anyway. But the reality is this is what their attention. So we have to do something. So they come up with this scheme that's going to please the king. And as they come up with this scheme, whoever they are, whether they're the eunuchs or the advisors, probably the advisors is not specific at this point. We do see the eunuchs mentioned later. But as they come together, they make this advice and they say, hey, I got an idea. We have this large empire. It's international. Persian women can be kind of self-willed, right? That's their reputation that we see. And you notice that the standard is not that you want a woman who's wise in diplomacy or a woman who is going to be someone who's going to stand up to the king, right? She has to be beautiful. She has to basically be a trophy. It's a trophy wife that they're looking for. That's what they're going. It doesn't matter how intellectual she is. Doesn't matter how smart she is. Doesn't matter how diplomatic she is. She has to. That's it. That's the standard. And it's important to understand how they've set this standard because they don't care about anything else. Now, some people say that this is a problem because in terms of these situations with Persia, that normally the king would choose from the royal wives or the royal families, which does sort of lend weight to what we see is going to happen with an assassination attempt, right? I mean, if you can get your sister in with the king when he's sleeping, it's very easy to take out the king. So you can understand, you give advice, hey, send that woman away. I got the perfect candidate, right? Because you're going to get your sister in there who's going to take out the king while he's sleeping. Well, it seems that plan's not going to work. And the advisors come up with another plan. We're going to find women who just don't care anywhere in the empire. Well, and so people say, well, he would have really chosen from the royal women, and as he's choosing from the royal families, this can't be true. Well, Herodias, the Greek historian that we say is the father of history, the first one to really consciously try and write history, is one who says Persian kings have normally done this, but they've also gone outside the royal family. So this isn't outside the realm of possibility, especially if they have to give a face going into Greece, because as this narrative goes on, we're going to get into Greece, in the midst of Greece, in that conflict. but you certainly want to have a face that this king is put together. You need a gorgeous queen to intimidate a foreign army, but you can't have a gorgeous queen who's going to go behind the king's back. So she has to be beautiful. She has to be silent. She has to be completely submissive. And so this is a standard you got to understand. Now, people, they try and read more into this, but that's really the tragedy of it. They don't care about this woman at all. You have to understand, she is 100% intended to be the king's jewelry. Now, some people say, well, this is another story where this is just a young girl's fantasy and it's an ancient Near Eastern sort of Disney princess tale. I don't know about you, but I'm hoping no woman has this fantasy or no little girl desires this. It's a tragic story. And if a little girl does desire this, please talk to one of us. This is not where you should see yourself. This is not your place in society. This is intended 100% to keep a trophy wife under the thumb and rule of a king. You can't minimize that. That's the intention of the story. The other backdrop from Genesis that we need to understand here is that this is the men saying, we are going to dominate the woman, right? Genesis 3, your desire will be for your husband. He will rule over you. The point is there's going to be the power struggle. Wife's going to want to rise up above the husband. The husband's going to be stronger. He's going to put down the wife. There's not going to be unity. There's not going to be harmony in the home. After the fall, there's just going to be that continual battle. Well, the promise the Lord makes, if you remember, another important detail to keep in the backdrop here, is that the Lord is going to bring up the seed of the woman, who will triumph over the seed of the serpent. And so the Lord's Messiah is going to come through the lineage of the woman, and he's going to be triumphant. This is another thing. You think of Persia conquering Babylon, taking out the Tower of Babel. Here we are as the ones who have overcome and brought the promise of God to a halt. They're going to dominate. They're going to set the terms as to what the woman can and cannot do. They themselves will do this. So it's important to understand the setting of the story, the setting of this plan, the desires of what's going on. You also notice how the king is easily moved around by the advisors. History has reported to us Ahasuerus Ahasuerus was very wise. He was a ruthless guy to go to war with. He was very smart in terms of military tactics. He was an intelligent individual, so we shouldn't see this man as just a complete and utter buffoon. He's skilled. He is competent, but at the same time, he's also known that he cannot always rule over his impulses, as we've seen, and history dictates that he's easily maneuvered by the advisors. So it's important to sort of see the settings of those cracks. We're kind of seeing this king as set up and established this way. And so we go on, we say, okay, so then who are the characters in this? How does this play out? Well, we find that there's another or two characters that enter the scene. We have a Jew. His name is Mordecai. Mordecai comes from the god Marduk, which is a Persian god. We find that this man's credentials are tied back to Saul. And when we hear that, we say, well, this is one who is at war with the line of David. So we say, are these friends or are these foes to the purpose of God? Is this a man who's going to continue to fight that bad blood between Saul and David? Or is this man really going to seek the greater royalty and Messiah that comes through the line of David? Now, in terms of his age, some people debate as to whether or not he was one who was literally carried off. It seems it's just like in Matthew's genealogy, it's identifying family lines. So with his name only being Marduk, or Mordecai, as we say in Hebrew, but really it's the god Marduk, It's very likely he was born in Persia. Only thing, and so it's establishing the family line back to his father, who's tied to royalty, who was carried off. This also gives credibility to him being in the king's court. He would have had skills in diplomacy. His family probably was involved in the king's court. But the thing that we need to note here is there is only a Persian name for this man. And at best, we tie him to Saul. So we kind of say, here's sort of a gray area. What is this man going to be? Who is this man in terms of this status? Now we hear of another character who's Hadassah or Esther. So these are two names that are given to us. It's the same person, but two identities. Now, this is not something that should alarm us. We see in the book of Daniel, that Daniel chapter 1, he's identified in a Persian name and a Hebrew name. But Daniel, God is my judge, is a name that's prominent throughout the book. And so that tells us in a subtle way, the commentary, Daniel is conscious in serving the Lord. Mordecai, a little concerning, because there is no Jewish name there. His Jewish lineage, we can kind of have some concerns about that. Hadassah is a name that literally means myrtle. This brings another layer of complexity into the story. Myrtle, when we look at Zechariah 1, is associated with the myrtle trees. In Zechariah, we have the first horseman that's sat there in the midst of the myrtle trees. This is a humble plant. It's a small plant. And so the name becomes symbolic of smallness, humility, insignificance. We hear she's an orphan. That tells us that there is a certain humility that's going on here. We also know that the myrtle tree from Zechariah 1 is associated with the exile. So this is a play on the remnant, the small remnant, the humble remnant. So we look at her name, Hadassah, in the Hebrew and say, okay, so we have this introduction of this character where we don't really know much about her, tied to the remnant. That's her name. So however she was brought into this place of exile, her family seems to have sort of a pious understanding that they're hoping in the remnant, right? The remnant would be the ones that the Lord keeps for himself and brings back to the land. So there's something there that gives us some optimism. Now, Esther is her Persian name. This is a name that's associated with Ishtar, the god of the stars or the god of the sky or whatever you want to say. Basically, when you think about the wise men coming to see Christ, they would be associated with the whole astrology of the stars and significance of the stars, and studiers of the sky, studiers of the gods of the sky, or tied to Venus. Anyway, there's all these ties that we can see that associate her with pagan idolatry. And so when we look at this woman, we say, okay, we're sort of in a tension here. Mordecai seems like he's Persian, maybe not as committed to the Lord as we would like, sort of that gray hero. Esther, she could be the remnant, right? She could be Hadassah. Or maybe she could just be humble and soft-spoken. Or maybe she's Persian, where she's giving in to the god Ishtar, and that's her identity. We don't know at this point in the story, and that's the intention of the narrative. That's why this is a good story. The intention is you're going to keep reading because you want to know what happens. Where does she end up in this? Well, we find that this woman, as she goes about her business, she's meeting the standard. She's young, she's beautiful, she's one who doesn't speak up much, right? Mordecai, her cousin, Septuagint says potentially her husband. Some of the Jewish traditions say that probably he's an older relative who has taken her into his home and has raised her up. I don't know if he's necessarily her husband, but again, the text is kind of unclear on that. So we don't know. This is something else that introduces a thing where you go, ooh, These are the heroes that God brings to our attention in the midst of exile. What's the Lord doing here, right? This isn't something that's overly clear or encouraging. But going on in the story, we find that Esther has her own diplomacy. She figures out how to basically interact with Haggai. Haggai is basically, he's the head person who's going to be preparing these women for the contest for the night with the king. And he's the one who's coaching her in how she's going to please the king, so the king would choose her. So whatever's going on with Esther, we don't know if it's because she's humble in the sense that she's quiet and doesn't speak up, right? That's not a true biblical humility. Biblical humility is actually tough, because biblical humility says you need to act with confidence in the Lord, right? We need to say, this is what I've done for the Lord. This is who I am in the Lord. But at the same time, we have to have a teachableness, an understanding that we are those who continually need to have the discernment of the living God. So that true biblical humility is tough. You have to be confident to go forward and make decisions, but at the same time, you have to have a teachable attitude and a teachable heart where you continue to understand you don't have it dialed. And so we need to continually refine ourselves. With Esther, it seems that this humility, at least as the text is setting it, is that we don't know if she has that humble confidence. We know that she's one who can capture the attention of the setting of the contest. She can capture his attention. She can be mentored by him. But we don't know if she really has the humble confidence. And we kind of look at the story and go, oh my goodness, what is going on here with the Lord? But she goes on. We find that the standard is that the Lord, or the king who sees himself as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the head of everything, is one where he would have the women spend the night with him, and then he would send them back and they'd go to the second harem. If he was happy with that particular concubine or member of the harem, he would call her by name. So this guy is kind of a pig, but I guess he's presented as sort of a classy pig. So whatever the case, that's how this contest is going on. We don't know where Esther is going to fare in this. And it's kind of a nail biter. So we find the actual contest as this transpires for Esther. And we're told sort of as the narrative slows down, now when the turn came for each of the women and the turn comes for Esther, right? When it's her turn to go into the king, that we find that there's no expense spared. Now the women who are able to take whatever they want from the harem basically are trying to figure out what the king desires, what he likes, or using their own creativity. And they think this is what the king's going to like. Esther is one who takes a completely different approach. So we see the humility in that she's willing to be instructed basically by the coach of the contest. I guess we could refer to Haggai. And she's willing to take instruction. He says, only, have these things and the king will be pleased with you and you'll win the contest. And so Esther goes and she follows this advice, and sure enough, we find that she is the one who is chosen to be queen. The language of the text, we have this language that the king loved her more than any of the other women. In terms of this love, we don't know what that really means. Does the king cherish her? Vashti was there. The king made a rather unreasonable and ridiculous request of her. She told him to take a hike. He sent her away. That's not love. That's not working through something. And so when it says that he loves Esther, does that mean if Esther at any point develops a will or a brain or interacts with her people. And again, I'm not saying this to be demeaning to Esther. This is the situation in the contest. They're not looking for a woman with a brain. They're not looking for a woman who's self-willed or a woman who's smart or has any intelligence. They don't care about that. But if Esther shows any advocacy, any self-will, any independent thought, what's going to happen to her? And that's the tension that we're left here in the story. What's going to happen to her? We know she's a Jew. We know she's identified with the people of God. The king doesn't. What's going to happen if she starts advocating for her people? Is she going to be truly humble and have the confidence of rising up as a remnant, preserved by God as a means that God uses to protect his people? Or is she going to be humble and silent and just stand by and be rather callous and cold? But notice something else about this king that with his love, right? This could be a true love, or it could be a love that Ammon has for Tamar, which isn't really love at all. It's just an uncontrollable desire. But something else about this king, he shows favor and loving kindness, or favor and mercy, however you want to translate it. This king himself is acting like God, using this language as if he's the one who's showing this mercy and this loving kindness to this poor woman, right? I mean, you think about that and say, my goodness, this guy. I mean, so full of himself, even as the text is subtly communicating. He's acting like God. I'm the one who determines who's going to receive mercy. I'm the one who determines who receives a place in the kingdom. You can hear why he's a headache, right? There's a lot of ego going on with this guy. Now, this man does understand some diplomacy. He hosts this feast, and so we have a feast that becomes parallel to the previous feast. Now, instead of Vashti trying to honor the drunken men, we have here the king honoring the new queen, that everything is resolved, everything is set, and he's the one who shows his excitement by giving tax relief and showing his generosity. Now, when we kind of pull back from the scene and we think about some of the puns going on here, the name Vashti, this is an important one because she's a queen that's replaced. She's put away. She leaves. We don't know. Her name literally means one that drinks, right? So we think about her as being invited to the drinking binge banquet, whatever you want to call it. That is just basically unbridled, unrestrained desires that the men can have. And the king is showing how great the kingdom is. Her name can also be a pun of empty beauty. And so she really becomes the symbol of what the kingdom is or was. A kingdom of drunkenness, a kingdom of banquets, a kingdom that appeared wealthy and prestigious, but really it's empty. The whole contest, we may say, why would women want to be part of this? Well, we're Americans and we can be thankful for God's providence. But if you look at the contest, you can either have a life where maybe you get one meal a day or you get 3 square meals. You can either live in a house that's 1 bedroom that smells like animal waste, or you can live in a luxury penthouse suite, right? So you can understand where even this appealing on the surface seems great and wonderful, but it's an empty existence. You're only living there with the hopes that maybe at some point the king would show maybe some affection, maybe know your name. So it's an empty kingdom. It's a kingdom filled with cracks and is not beauty. But there's other things about Esther I did not bring out. Because we can set it up as if Esther is merely just the humble queen or the humble remnant where she just stays off to the side, never really identifies who she is, or she could have the integrity. But even in the Persian understanding, the name Esther, when I first went through this, I thought Esther maybe just calling attention that she's just Persian. But there's another pun here that's brilliant. In the Persian mindset, the star is something that's done by divine providence or divine appointment. So when the wise men come to see Christ, they see a star in the east. They see him as a one of divine appointment. Hopefully I brought that out when we went through Luke. I didn't go back and look because one of my friends said sometimes it's too painful to look and see all that you missed. But if I didn't bring that out, I should have brought that out. That's the beauty of seeing Christ as a divine appointment in their whole system of thinking or their religion. So when you think of Esther then being the star of Ishtar, it becomes this other thing that should assure us. When we say, well, will she be the humble remnant? The answer is her name's Esther. This is divine appointment. God promises to preserve his remnant. Esther becomes symbolic of the remnant, and Esther is the one who will be the means that God will use in his divine appointment to show his providence and his care. As God is silent, he is still at work. Even as we look at this scene and we leave wondering what has happened to God's people, the assurance is that when God is the most silent, sometimes he's the most powerful. And so in conclusion, when we ask that question, is this king going to gain world domination? Well, the reality is there is a king that we always must bow the knee to, and it is Christ. It is our God. Our God has vowed that the seed of the woman will triumph. That is his promise. The beauty of this whole setup in this scene is that it's setting up that the seed of the woman will not triumph. A woman will not gain domination over a man. The men will rule, the men will have their club, and the men will be the ones who will show that God himself really isn't the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. But the funny thing is, the woman that they see as easy on the eyes and in her own mind would be easier on the ears because she wouldn't challenge the king as far as we can tell, is the one who is going to bring this whole narrative, this whole empire to a halt. That she becomes the ultimate hero in the sense that the Lord works through her in showing that the seed of the woman will triumph. And so when we look at the book of Esther and say, what do we ultimately take from this? It's an assurance that when God is in the midst of his people, even when we don't see his hand, even when we don't hear his name, even when it seems that he is so silent, we can be assured that God is working. He will prevail. And when the Lord says, I am a shield and defender, he's not lying. He defends. He protects his people. Let us then proceed in that humility, where we have a confidence. We are the Lord's. We desire and seek truth for the glory of God, but we maintain that continual teachableness of wanting to be instructed in his wisdom and in his power. And let us understand that even as God may seem silent, he is working, he is powerful, and he works through the weakest people to carry out the greatest outcomes. Amen. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We're Belgrade URC, a Reformed Bible-believing church in the Gallatin Valley in Belgrade, Montana. We meet Sundays at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., and we love to see you worshiping and fellowshipping with us each Sunday. Learn more about our church at belgradeurc.com, where you can subscribe to our podcasts and use our sermon archive. Until we meet again, may the Lord's blessing and peace be upon you.